right. Okay. Let's see. I see two people zooming in. Hayden and William. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah, I can hear you good.
Okay.
Yeah, you're good.
Great. For some reason, I don't have any trouble with this class, and my other class, they can't hear me. It's like you figure out what the right setting should be, and then it doesn't work.
So you did say all these are recorded and saved on Zoom?
Yeah. Each class is recorded on Zoom, so you can zoom in if you're sick. You can.
Did you see how you before and let us know when we review?
Yeah, that would be good. But then, if there's something you miss, you can go in same place under Zoom, and it will have the recording there. You can, and some of this is not especially today, but later on it will get pretty complicated, and so you may need to go back and review some things.
Never heard it.
Yeah. And, okay. So let's call roll. Catherine Brown. William Dagrapont, I see you're here. Grant Darter.
Here.
Okay, you're Grant. Hayden, I see you're here. Matthew, I see you're here. Patricia Lewis, you're here. Lewis Morgan. Abigail Swallow. No. Sarah Vadreen. Sarah Watson. Okay. And Dylan West. Okay. All right. Okay. Today we're going to continue our review of supply and demand, chapter 4, but also, if you have trouble with supply and demand, you need to go back to chapter 3 as well, because it's like the alphabet. If you have trouble with the alphabet, you have to review it before you're going to be able to go on. When I was in the first grade, I had trouble with B's and D's, and if I hadn't figured that out, I would be in trouble. So you want to understand supply and demand very well. That's why we're going back through some of this today. Okay, and
I'm sorry. I just had I've been having this brain fart for the past week. I couldn't figure out why some of my classes weren't showing up. I just figured out because there's second session classes, so there's no need to stress out about it. So, like,
That's,
and my day has just gotten like instantly better.
you're not the first person to get confused about
I
that.
feel so much better now, so I'm sorry.
I understand completely. I really do. I had a student one time come to me as a class that only met once a week. She came the fourth week of class and came up and said, "I'm sorry I haven't been here. I forgot that I was taking this class." Anyway, it's easy to forget things when a lot is going on and a lot's going on there. Okay. What we're going to do today, I'm going to go through some of the slides I have in the PowerPoint, and then some examples that I want you to think about. And I really want you to, as I go through these, when I ask a question, if you don't know the answer, you can still take a shot at it, because it's really important that you think through these things. And for me to see what you have trouble with. We talked, just to remember the big picture. You don't want to get lost in the details. Everything begins with scarcity. We don't have enough resources to produce all the things we want. So we have to make choices. We have to ration what is available between among all the potential uses. And so we have to have some kind of rationing device to decide who's going to get what. We could just fight over everything. Whoever's stronger gets what they want, but most of us would say that's not the kind of society we want to live in. In a market economy, the main rationing mechanism is the price. Whoever's willing to pay the most, they get it. If you're not willing to pay as much or able to pay as much, then you don't get the thing that you'd like to have. So in we said that there are a lot of different rationing mechanisms that can be used. In this course, especially, we're focusing on the price mechanism. In a society that depends on markets, how do things work? And are we likely to get an outcome that most people will say, hey, that was pretty good? Or are we likely to get an outcome that most people would say is pretty bad? These days, a lot of people have a very dim view of capitalism, and they think that, well, that benefits the rich, but doesn't help the average person or the poor a lot. I would suggest to you that what we're going to see in this course is that that's not correct. Yes, high-income people do very well in a market economy, but the average person and low-income people also, I would suggest to you, do better than they would do under other systems. But for now, we're simply trying to understand, if we depend on the price mechanism, what's going to happen? What determines the price of a product? And we saw last time that, depends on consumers and it depends on producers. When you go to buy gasoline, you don't get to just pay whatever you want, and the producer doesn't get to charge whatever he wants. He could set a price, $10 million per gallon. He can do that. He won't be able to sell anything. Okay? And his goal is to make profit. So he's really constrained in what he can charge. And you don't get to pay what you want. You have to, the price is the result of the interaction between the consumers and the producers. And we use supply and demand to help us think about, what is the end result going to be? What is the price going to be as all these consumers and producers in a market interact with each other? And we said that, we said that in a competitive market, that's all we're looking at so far. Later, we'll talk about other kinds of markets. You got lots of consumers, lots of producers. Supply and demand is very helpful in enabling us to see what the results are going to look like. And we talked about the demand curve. We said that negatively sloped demand curve, what does that tell us? What does that show us? If there was a blind person here and they said, I can't see the demand curve, well, explain it to me. What could you say?
The amount that's supplied and then the amount that's demanded by the consumers.
It's showing us the amount that consumers will demand, quantity demanded. It's showing us the quantity that producers will be willing to supply. And each curve is showing us how those quantities depend or how they vary with the price. The negative slope of the demand curve is telling us as the price goes down, consumers want to buy more. There's an inverse relationship between the price and the quantity demanded. And it's easy to say that, and it's easy to say, yeah, that makes sense, and not really incorporate it into your thinking and not really get it. I've had experiences in my office where I'll explain something to somebody and they'll say, yeah, that's right. Yeah, I got it. Say, okay, what does that mean? And I go, I don't know. I mean, they were completely convinced they understood it, but they couldn't say one single word to explain it. So you have to really ask yourself, do I understand this? Can I put it into my own words? That's really the key. Can I put it into my own words? And that's why I'm going to ask you questions today, because I want you to explain the answer. Okay? Because you can have very simple graphs which you don't know how to, you think you know how to explain it, but you really don't. So the demand curve showing us, it's describing consumer behavior. It's showing us how quantity demanded will vary as the price changes. And the negative slope is saying when the price goes down, quantity demanded goes up. Okay? Consumers want to buy more when the product becomes cheaper, other things being equal. If something else changes that affects the consumer, well, then we don't know what will happen. But if the only thing that's changing is the price is going down, consumers will want to buy more. Likewise, supply is describing what? What does the supply curve describe?
How much of something is available and at what price it can be attained.
Okay, and how much is available or how much producers will supply. Always remember the amount available is the result of producers. It's easy to kind of think that, well, things are just available, but no, things are available only when somebody decides to produce it. And so the supply curve is showing us the relationship between the quantity that producers will choose to supply and make available and how that, or the relationship between that quantity and the price of the product. And you see the supply curve is upward sloping, which means that as the price goes up, producers choose to supply more. I've used an example in the past of transportation services. If I come to class and I say, I really need to get to Shreveport, and how many of you are willing to supply that service to me? That's
You give me a Happy Meal, 10 guys, we good.
That's what people want to know. Well, what usually the question is, well, am I going to get bonus points out of this or something like that? And if I say, well, sorry, no Happy Meal, no bonus points. In fact, I don't have any money. We're going to have to go in your car and you're going to have to buy the gas. Then, people are really slow to figure out a way to say, yeah, I really, really want to help, but no, I can't do it. Quantity supplied when the price I'm offering is zero, is pretty close to zero. If I say, well, maybe I can find money, I'll pay for the gas. Okay? And why my screen just went blank here? That's just so weird. If I say I'll pay for the gas, well, then I'll have a few people say, well, yeah, okay, I can do it. But still, most people don't. They're not willing to supply that service to me. And if I put them on the spot and I say, well, you don't want to help me? And I say, well, yeah, I'll help, but I have other things to do. In other words, I have an opportunity cost of their time. And that makes perfect sense. If I say, okay, well, I'll pay you $100. The quantity supplied, the number of people willing to supply that service to me goes up. And if I say, I really have to be sure I get there, I will pay you $1,000. Anybody who's willing to supply me transportation this afternoon, pay you $1,000. What do you think happens to the quantity? It goes way up. The higher the price, the larger the quantity supplied. Almost everybody decides they want to help. And one person say, well, I'd like to, but I don't have a car. Well, if I offer you a price that's high enough, you will go out and you will rent a car. Okay? If I offer you a price that's high enough, even if you're getting married today, you'll take me, okay? Without even telling your fiance. That's a very high opportunity cost. But
Because that lawyer cost down the road is going to be even higher than the opportunity cost.
$1,000 probably wouldn't be enough. But what if I offered you $10,000, $20,000? There's some amount where you would be willing to go to your fiance later and say, I'm really sorry, but I just made $50,000. And that's what the supply curve is reflecting. That if the price the producer gets is very low, then only producers, only people who have a very low opportunity cost are going to do it. People who say, yeah, I don't have anything better to do, so I might as well do it. As the price goes up, people who do have a fairly high opportunity cost gradually start to say, okay, yeah, it's in my interest to do this. And if it gets high enough, then the quantity supply is going to be very high. Okay? That's the idea. As the price is going up, it is increasing the incentive that producers have to provide the service, and you're getting more and more people offering to provide this service. And notice, probably none of you think of yourself as a transportation provider. But if I raise the price enough, you're willing to stop what you're doing and start providing that service. Dips of ice cream. If you can sell dips of ice cream for $2 a dip at the baseball game, I'm not going to do that. But if you tell me you can sell dips of ice cream for $500 a dip, and people want to buy lots of them, I would say, it's been fun. I'm going to go make $500 per dip. And I would quit my job and I would go provide ice cream dips. That's what's going on behind the supply curve. So each curve is describing the behavior of one of the parties, the consumers or the producers. They don't want the same thing. The consumers want a low price. The producers want a high price. Okay? So they're not going to agree on a price that they both think is good. Okay? So what's it going to be? Well, the supply curve and the demand curve show us that there's one price at which the quantity demanded, the quantity that consumers want to buy, will be equal to the quantity supplied. There will be a balance. There's a price that will bring about a balance. So that you've, right. That's what's going on in that equilibrium. And that's what we mean by equilibrium. It's where you have a balance between quantity demanded and quantity supplied. It also means, or equilibrium is in any science, is where there's no tendency for change. And we're going to see that that is the case when we're in equilibrium, and we're going to see when we're not in equilibrium, then there will be a tendency for change. All right, so let me ask, in this example we have here, this is the price of, I think they're talking about oil here, and it is a worldwide market, got consumers, producers all over the world. Tell me, what's going to happen if the price is not at $60? Because, you know, how do we ever get to equilibrium? Because who knows what the equilibrium price is? You know? I don't know. You don't know. The producers don't know. Government doesn't know. So we can very easily not be at the equilibrium. So what if it is up here at $90? Walk me through what's going to happen.
You're not gonna sell as much, but per sell, you're getting more money.
Who?
The producer.
Okay. The producers are going to be concerned about this. Okay? If the price is $90, how do we determine the amount that will be that they can sell?
It'll be on the quantity line.
We have, well, we do have to go down to the quantity line, okay? But to determine what's going to happen, and this is, we're going to walk through how you use this graph in very small steps, because people tend to jump through it quickly and they don't understand it well. We're assuming that the price is 90. Okay? In taking notes, it's always important. Be sure that you know what we're assuming, okay? Because there's no reason that the price would be 90 here. Okay? We're just saying, what if it is? And then we're trying to find out what consequences will result, because the consequences are very predictable. So we say, if the price is 90, two questions. How much will consumers want to buy? What's the other question?
How much will the producers be willing to produce?
How much will the producers be willing to produce? How much will they be trying to sell? Okay? And we answer those questions by starting at 90, reading horizontally over, and we said you can read the demand curve horizontally or vertically. So we're starting at 90, we're reading horizontally over to the demand curve, we read down, and that gives us the quantity demanded, the number of units consumers will want to buy given that price. And we don't know exactly what that's going to be, but let's say it's 300. All we know for sure is it's something less than 700. Okay? What do we do now? So the best way to prepare for the exam, you have to go answer enough questions so that it's not just that you know what to do, it's that you have gone through it over and over and over so you know the next thing to do.
Need to adjust the demand curve?
No? We know what consumers are going to want to do. They're going to want to buy 300 units if the price is 90. So what? So now we ask, well, given that $90 price, what will the producers want to do? Okay. So you read horizontally to the supply curve, you read down, that is the quantity supplied if the price is $90. Okay. And we don't know exactly what that's going to be, but it's certainly greater than 700. So let's say it's 950. Okay, so we started with an assumption that the price right now is 90. Then we determined, using the demand curve, what the quantity demanded would be. We then determined what the quantity supplied would be. We now know that consumers are going to buy 300, or they're willing to buy 300. Producers are willing to sell 950. Now, think about what that means.
Is it a surplus?
It's a surplus. Okay? The price is going to go down. Okay? But absolutely right. But just make sure you have a sense of what this situation is, because it's math. It's not just math. In graduate school, there were a number of math majors who were looking for a course to take, and they said, "Oh, economics, that's easy because it's just math." No, it's not just math. It is math plus. And those math majors had absolutely no trouble with the math in the econ class, but they generally failed the class because they thought it was only math. And you've got to have a sense of what these curves are representing. So you take the picture and then you think about the real world situation. You've got a market here. You've got consumers who are going to buy 300 units. You got producers who are producing and trying to sell 3 times that much. So if you're a consumer, are you going to have any trouble finding a producer to sell to you? No, they're all over the place. If you're a producer, do you like this situation? No, because you like the high price, but you're producing lots of output that you can't sell.
That's just what you consider gathering dust in the warehouse.
Well, if this is oil, then it's filling up in a storage facility, which has very definite finite limits. It's very costly to store oil. So if you're a producer, this is a big problem. Okay? And how do we describe it? Quantity supplied is greater than quantity demanded. And what do we call that? A surplus or excess supply. Okay? And so if you're the producer, remember there's lots of producers out there. If you're the producer, you're thinking about, how do I get rid of this extra inventory? And everybody's selling at $90. If I cut my price just a little bit, just a little, consumers will buy from me. So each producer has an incentive to cut, or let's say you're a producer, you have an incentive to cut your price a little bit. Let's say I'm a producer. What incentive do I have?
You're going to match me or get better.
I have an incentive to not only match you, but a little bit more, cut a little bit more. Okay? And that's what all the producers have an incentive to do. They are trying to do what is in their best interest. And each one says, the best thing for me to do is to lower my price. And when that surplus, that surplus is causing pressure, doesn't matter. Because of the surplus, each producer has an incentive to cut his price. And when he starts to cut his price, that's when the price mechanism begins to function. Right? The producers don't want to do it, right? But we'll talk about Adam Smith, the invisible hand. When the price starts to go down, that is the price mechanism beginning to work.
So during the period of the surplus, whoever's, like the oil example, there's people who've made all this oil and they haven't stored, or they haven't stored, they're not going to pump or drill anymore because they have this amount that they have to move.
Well, it gets really complicated because it gets more complicated than I realized before April. Because you once you drill the well and you're pumping, you can't turn it off easily. And if you turn it off, you may not be able to turn it back on. So it gets rather complicated. But once it's pumping, you know, some amount is being supplied. And so as soon as the producer starts to think I'm going to have a surplus, then he's got to do something to deal with it. And so he has an incentive to cut his price. But all the other producers have the same incentive. So the price starts to go down. Remember what we said about the function or the role of prices. One is that prices communicate information. And we see that here. The following price is telling producers, consumers do not value this product as much as you thought. Cut back. And the following price is telling consumers, this product is not as scarce as you thought it was. It's okay to use more. So it communicates that information, but it also creates an incentive for them to act on it because the consumers see that it's cheaper now. And so as the price goes down, they choose to use more. And the producers, as the price is going down, they have an incentive to cut back on production because they're losing money on this. And so as they cut back, quantity supplied is going to go down. The producers are moving down the supply curve. And as the price is falling, consumers are moving down the demand curve. Everybody is adjusting their behavior, the consumers and the producers. Notice when the price was 90, we were not in equilibrium. We did not have a balance. We had too much oil being produced. So question is, when a market's not in balance, how do we get back into balance? And a lot of people, their natural tendency is to think, well, you know, we need government to figure out what to do and tell people, you know, give orders and we'll get back to balance. Notice here, there's nobody in charge. You got lots of consumers, you got lots of producers. Nobody cares about the fact that there's a surplus overall. Each individual producer cares that he can't sell all of his output. Okay? Everybody's focused on their own problems. Everybody's trying to do what's best for them. And as they do that, the price comes down, consumers start buying more, and producers start supplying a smaller quantity. And so what happens to that surplus? The surplus gradually gets smaller and smaller. We had a $650 unit surplus initially, but the price goes down. That motivates both the consumers and the producers to change their behavior. And that process continues as long as there's a surplus. And so we get pushed from $90 down to $60. And once we're at 60, the quantity demanded is 700. The quantity supplied is 700. We're in balance. The problem is solved, even though there was nobody who was trying to solve it. The consumers were just trying to get the product they want at the lowest possible price. Producers are trying to make as much profit as they can, but we end up in balance. We end up with an outcome that nobody intended. Nobody was trying to reach, but it is the result of each party making decisions that they believe will be best for them. Okay? That's Adam Smith's idea of the invisible hand, that people are pushed to act in ways that achieve an end that was not their intention. Okay? And under many situations, I say most situations, the price mechanism does a very good job of getting us to a desirable outcome like this. Now, over in chapter 10, we'll talk about externalities. Those are situations where, I won't go into it now, but when you have externalities, then the market outcome doesn't have this ideal property that we would like. Okay? There's also something called public goods, where a private market doesn't give us an ideal outcome. Okay? But those are kind of exceptions. We'll get to those later. But here we're simply trying to understand how markets in general work. And what we have here is just basic supply and demand analysis. But it's more complicated than most people realize. And if you can use this graph, you understand this graph, then you're in good shape for what we're going to be doing later. Okay? Any part of this you don't understand or you're having trouble with, you really need to work on. Questions so far at this point? Okay. Well, and it'll be up on the in the Zoom video. The process works the same way. If the price is actually, if you go through the video, you'll see there's slides here that take you through it in more detail. If the price is below the equilibrium, then the opposite happens. Okay? It's a shortage. But you want to be sure that you can talk through it. Because if you can't talk your way through it, you're not going to be able to use the analysis on the exam. Here, if I gave you this graph, explain that. What's going on in this graph? To the person who can't see the graph, what could you say? Yeah.
At price of $55, the demand isn't there for, or I'm sorry, there's too much demand for 500 units of product.
Well, I wouldn't say too much demand. There's a better way to say that. Because remember, demand refers to the whole demand curve. Okay?
The quantity demand.
Yeah, that's it. If at the $55 price, the quantity demanded is greater than what?
Quantity supply.
Greater than the quantity supply. You've got consumers who want to buy this much, 900. Producers are only willing to supply this much, 500. So what do we have here? We have a shortage. What is the amount of the shortage? Are you sure?
200.
I didn't say you were wrong.
I'm going to say yeah, because there's only 500 units, but people want 900 of them, so they're going to be short 400 units.
There is a shortage of 400 units. And I ask you that because on the exam question like this, what will happen if the price is $55? I'd say probably at least 40% of people will say there will be a shortage of 200 units. And what are they doing?
Going by the equilibrium.
That's right. They see the $50 price, $55 price. They see the quantity demanded of 900. They see the number 700. That's the closest number there. So they say 200 unit gap. And no, it is 500. That's why you got to be really careful. When you work through a problem like this, even if you're not given the graph, draw the graph yourself and work through it as if you're explaining it to somebody else. Okay? You say, well, here looks like the price is 55. You go over to the demand curve, you read down, consumers want 900. Then at the same price, you read to the supply curve and say, well, producers are only willing to supply 700. So the shortage is the 400 gap there. It's very easy to get the wrong amount. Excuse me. Economics is,
So to bring it into the equilibrium, would then the suppliers have to pump out more units to meet the 900 demand?
why would they do that?
There's no incentive. There's no incentive.
You have 200 more units to bring it up to 7.
You always want to think in terms of incentive. What incentive do they have? And here the price is 55. As long as the price is 55, they have an incentive to produce only 500 units. Okay? So are we just going to sit there with a shortage?
Because there's going to be somebody else to do something better.
Like what? Yeah. The price is going to go up. Okay? And why does this is really important to think about. Why does the price go up? As the price goes up, it does limit, it reduces the amount that consumers will want to buy. Okay? When the price goes up, there are all kinds of ways you can get confused here. Okay. Question?
I don't understand. Yeah, there's a way you get confused.
Because there's a way to, it's a series of steps. And if you follow the right sequence, it's very simple. But if you start thinking about it a different way, you end up with the wrong answer. Okay. To show you one way you could get confused, you could say, well, if the producers, if they raise their price, they won't be able to sell as much. Is that true? It is true. They raise the price, consumers will not buy as much. But notice, let's say they raise it to $57, and now consumers are only willing to buy maybe 850 units. Okay? That's more than the producers want to supply anyway. Okay? So here's the right way to think about it. You start with the price. You say, how much do producers want to supply, or what quantity? 500. What quantity do consumers want to buy at that price? 900. Say, okay, clearly quantity demanded is greater than quantity supplied. What do we call that? That's a shortage. Okay? And just to show you how easy it is to make mistakes, I can't tell you how many people on exams will pick an answer that it's a shortage. When they look at it afterwards, they say, I knew it was a surplus. But you can know it and you still make a mistake. That's why you have to go slow and be careful. Okay? At that price, quantity demanded is 900. Quantity supplied is 500. That is a shortage. Think about what it means for there to be a shortage for the consumer. Okay? Let's say this was gas. If there's a shortage of gas, what does that mean for you as a consumer? You are going to have to pay higher prices, but right in that instant where there's a shortage, it means it's hard for you to get it. You want some, you can't find anybody who has some. Okay? And you're willing to pay more. for the producer, what does it mean to have a shortage? He doesn't want there to be a shortage, but if I'm a producer and I start to realize there's going to be a shortage, that means there are consumers who are willing to pay more. And so the producer says, this means, since there's a shortage, this means I can raise my price and I'll still be able to sell as much as I want to sell. Okay. So, well, he wants to make profit. He'd like to raise his price. So if there's a shortage, then that means there's an opportunity for him to raise his price.
So say that the demand was more than he wanted to sell to begin with, so he raises his price, and the demand would be where he wants to sell at. Does that make sense? So like he gets the best of both worlds?
I wouldn't say it quite like that. I would say, and always be careful that you use demand and quantity demanded correctly. Because if you confuse those two, just forget it. You know, you're done. But if you use those correctly and you practice doing that, it won't be long before you go, this is really not that hard. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've heard people say that. And I always say, yeah, you're right. It's not that hard, but it is until you understand it. So here, again, if the price is 55, we've already seen there's going to be a shortage. From the perspective of the consumer, he's having trouble finding the gas that he wants. So he's willing to pay more. And in fact, the consumer may offer a higher price. You don't think of consumers as offering a higher price, but if, let's say there's a gas station in your neighborhood and they run out of gas regularly, you would have an incentive to say, hey, look, save me some gas, I'll pay you more. You have an incentive when you offer a higher price. What are you doing? You are bidding, you're trying to outbid the other consumers. It's not that you want to pay a higher price, it's that is the way that you can compete for the gas that's available. Okay? So the consumer has an incentive to offer a higher price. But most of the time, the producer figures it out. The producer realizes there's going to be a shortage if we keep the price down. So I can raise my price and still sell as much as I want to sell, and I'll make more profit. So when we have a shortage, the price is going to go up. Okay? No doubt about it. Unless government prevents it. Okay? The price is going, maybe I should also say, unless government or public opinion prevents it, the price is going to go up. Okay? And as the price goes up, always remember that is the price mechanism beginning to function. That's the invisible hand beginning to work. The higher price tells producers, people really want more of this. You should produce more of it. And it creates an incentive for producers to respond to that. Okay? They don't say, well, we don't care about the consumers. They say, it's now profitable for us to produce more. And so the quantity supplied goes up. Likewise, on the consumer side, as the price goes up, it's now more painful to fill up your gas tank. And so you have an incentive to cut back on the amount that you use. I remember when I was in graduate school in 1979, and the price of gas, I mean, it was low compared to today. And I think it was like 85 cents a gallon.
Jesus.
But of course, that was 40 years ago. So if you adjust for inflation, it was a lot higher. People, we compare to what it used to be. And I remember going into my class and economics class, the head of the department was teaching it, and he had a Cadillac. I mean, this is 70s where, you know, fuel guzzlers. And he came into class and he said, I just filled up my Cadillac and it was blank number of dollars. That's ridiculous. I mean, he was emotional because of how much he had to spend to fill up that tank. So, you know, it hurts when the price goes up and consumers cut back. And so so consumers definitely get the message, this product is more scarce than before, and they have an incentive to cut back. So the quantity demanding goes down, the quantity supply goes up. We move to equilibrium. We end up where we have a balance between the quantity consumers want to buy and the quantity producers want to sell. And think about it, in that equilibrium, consumers can get all the gas they want at the market price, and producers can sell all they want to sell at the market price. You don't have any consumers who say, I'm willing to pay the price, I've got the money, I can't find anybody to sell to me. Don't have any producers who say, you know, my inventory is going up. Okay? No, we have a balance. It's exactly where we want to end up. And yet there is nobody trying to get us there. The producers are trying to make profit. Consumers are trying to get the product they want as cheaply as possible. But even though nobody's trying to get us to that equilibrium, that's exactly where we end up. It's just kind of a magical kind of thing. It's not magic, but it seems that way. How do we get there when nobody's trying to get us there? And when you recognize it's not just the market for oil or for gas, throughout the whole economy, in every little city and big city, you got all these markets, all these goods, the price mechanism is functioning to bring us into balance. When things change, we have an imbalance, but as soon as there's an imbalance, the price mechanism begins to function and to restore balance. It's an incredible thing. And it's an incredible thing that everybody sees, it's all around us. Most people are totally oblivious to, and not only are they oblivious to it, when they see the price changing, they get upset. The producer's, you know, gouging me. Okay? But it's an incredible aspect of reality that benefits us greatly. And we know what happens when you don't use the price mechanism, because in the Soviet economy, they didn't use the price mechanism. They had government trying to get markets to equilibrium. And as a result, people had to spend, I believe I read something like an average of 4 hours a day standing in line to get stuff.
Historical fact, the Sears Roebuck catalog and Montgomery Ward catalog, catalogs were regularly smuggled in to the Soviet Union so that the price adjusters are adjusting off of the Western prices.
That is interesting. I had not heard that, but that makes perfect sense. What he just said was that Sears catalogs were smuggled into the Soviet Union, and they would use those prices to guide their actions. That fits very well with, I had a professor at A&M, Texas A&M, who was from Yugoslavia. And he said he was talking one time to a Soviet economist, and he said he was at a conference where they were presenting papers, and these communist or socialist economists were talking about prices. You know, how they would set prices at this level and this level. And afterwards he said, you keep talking about how you're going to set prices. How are you going to know what the prices should be? And he said, well, we get those prices from another country. And he said, but, you know, according to communism, eventually the revolution will be worldwide. And so all economies will be socialistic. So there won't be any market economies for you to get these prices from. And the guy's response was, well, we assume that even after the revolution is complete, somewhere there'll still be markets and we can get our prices from there. Just hilarious. But that is what they said. Anyway, supply and demand is it's a framework that is just extremely powerful in helping us understand how things work in a market economy. Any questions here? Yeah.
On the demand side, as the price is going up, the demand is going to go down because,
Eh?
sorry, the quantity demanded
Right.
is going to go down.
Right.
So as the price is going up, the quantity, it's throwing me off looking at the graph, that the quantity, the arrow for quantity demanded is going up, price is going up. But in my mind's eye, I see the quantity demanded going down.
Okay. What he's talking about, what's happening on the demand curve as the price is going up. And we would not say as the price goes up, demand goes down. That's not correct. Okay? What is correct is to say as the price goes up, the quantity demanded goes down. Okay? We stay on the same demand curve, but as the price is going up, other things being equal, then the quantity demanded goes down, which means a movement along the demand curve. Okay? Because as we're moving up the demand curve, that just means the price is going up and it's motivating consumers to buy less. Same on the supply curve. As the price is going up, that does not change supply. It changes what?
Price for the existing supply.
Yeah.
How does the curve work if there's an infinite amount of supply?
If there's what?
If there's an infinite amount of supply.
That's an interesting question. If you had an infinite amount of supply, what would the price be?
There would be no price. It's just very scarcity.
If you have an infinite amount, then it's not a scarce good. The price would be zero, and we would be way down here. Okay.
What about a subscription service like Amazon Prime,
Okay.
where there's infinite amount of product and they pretty much pick that price?
The amount isn't infinite. Are you talking about for the subscription service?
Yeah, the service.
No, that's not going to be infinite because the price there's going to be a demand. Question is about Amazon Prime. If I'm sure they do a lot of analysis trying to figure out what is the best price to charge for them. And, you know, I'm sure they're aware the higher they raise the price, the fewer people are going to buy, to subscribe to the service. That gets more complicated than we're going to get into here. Bring that up later because that's a really interesting question. And also when you're talking about that kind of thing, chapter 16, I believe it is, talks about network effects, like with Facebook and Amazon. And it's something that very few textbooks deal with, but this book does. So bring that up again later. But here we're talking about where you got lots of consumers, lots of producers. There's a finite amount available. That's the supply curve is showing you that. And if it was infinite, then the price would be zero. Other questions here? In what we have gone through here, did demand change at all? No. Did supply change at all? No. Notice when you're not in equilibrium, it's the price that adjusts, not the demand curve, not the supply curve. It's price that adjusts, and you move along those two curves, but you don't shift either one of them. Okay. Let's see here. Let's do a few examples of how we can use this analysis to analyze changes that occur. Okay, so let's say this is the market for aluminum bicycles. Okay, and let's say the price initially is, I have no idea, but let's say it's $500. If I tell you that the price of aluminum has just doubled, what's going to happen in this market? Will there be any change? There will be.
The demand,
Well, why will there be?
Well, because if it doubled, price of doubled, that means that there's a scarcity.
Well, it certainly it's a scarce good, and so if the price is changing, that tells you something about scarcity conditions are changing. But who cares? Does the consumer know what the price of aluminum is? Probably not. Okay. And does the consumer really care what the price of aluminum is? No. Does the producer know about the price of aluminum? Yes, because in order to produce aluminum bicycles, he's got to buy aluminum. And so, whereas he was paying one price before, now he's going to have to pay a lot more. The cost of buying this input is much higher. Is that a good thing for him or a bad thing? And it's bad. If you're the producer, you're having to buy the inputs, you're going to have to pay out more. This is one example of a shift factor for supply. Okay? It's the aluminum is an input used to produce the product. And when the price of an input changes, that has a direct effect on the producer. Okay? So again, to understand supply, you've got to think from the perspective of the producer. And that's harder for most people because most of us haven't been a producer. We've been consumers all of our lives, but we haven't been producers. So you have to put on your producer hat to think about supply. There'll be lots of questions where you're told, here's a market. You're told some change that has occurred, and you have to figure out what's going to happen. And the question you ask is this a shift factor for demand or a shift factor for supply? You don't try to figure out what's this going to do to the price. You go through it step by step. You say, is this a shift factor for demand or for supply? And if it's the price of an input, then it is going to be the a shift factor for supply. And let's see here. Somewhere in your book, somewhere in this, well, I don't see it, but in somewhere in your book is a list. No. Here are the shift factors for demand, but there's also a list of shift factors for supply. You want to be very, very familiar with those lists. Okay? Shift factors for demand. You want to know what's listed there, but more importantly, you want to understand what does it mean? Okay? Shift factors for demand are things that have a direct impact on consumers. So that if one of these things change, the consumer is the one who's directly impacted. Okay? Income. Okay? If your income goes up, your income quadruples. Okay? Well, that's probably going to affect how much you eat out. It's going to affect your demand for apartment houses. It's going to affect your demand for all kinds of things. Okay? So income is a shift factor for demand. Producers will be indirectly affected, okay? But they're not directly affected. Okay? Population is a shift factor for demand. If you talk about the demand for movie tickets, if you have a population of 50,000 people, there's going to be some demand. If another 50,000 move into the city, demand is going to go up because you've got more people who might want to go to see a movie. Okay? Prices of substitutes and complements. Okay? We talked about that in macro, but you need to review that. Substitutes are two things that people tend to use one or the other.
Coffee versus tea.
Coffee versus tea. You generally don't drink both at the same time. You want caffeine, you could drink one, you could drink the other. Pepsi versus Coke, those are substitutes. If one becomes more expensive, the demand for the other goes up. Okay? Complements would be things that you tend to use together.
Like sugar.
Coffee and sugar, coffee and creamer, things like that. If the price of sugar goes way up, what's going to happen to the demand for coffee? It's going to go down because drinking your cup of coffee with sugar in it is now going to be more expensive. And then there are other things that are listed here. Key idea is that we spend a lot of time talking about demand. These are the things that will shift the demand curve. Okay? And then the shift factors for supply, which I are here, but I don't see them. Here they are. Technological innovations and changes in the price of inputs. That's what we were looking at here. If you're talking about the market for aluminum bicycles, well, then clearly you have to have aluminum to make the aluminum bicycle. So if the price of the aluminum goes up, that has a direct impact on the producer. Producer says, it's going to cost me more now to buy the aluminum to produce these bikes. If it costs them more, that means it's not as profitable to produce the product. And if it's not as profitable to produce, they're not going to produce as much. Okay? So basically anything that decreases profitability is going to cause the supply curve to decrease. It's going to shift to the left. Anything that increases profitability is going to increase supply. It's going to shift it to the right. Okay? The only exception to that is if the price of the product changes. If the price of aluminum bicycles goes up, that doesn't change the supply of bicycles. It moves you along the curve. Okay? That's the confusing part. Some things shift the curve, some things move you along the curve. Okay? And once you go through this enough and you get it down, it's not hard, but it can be rather confusing at first. So going back to our example, I can find it. Okay, so if the price of aluminum goes up, it's now less profitable to produce aluminum bicycles. So the supply of aluminum bicycles is going to decrease. It's a leftward shift of the curve. Okay, so once supply decreases, what happens now? The price is going to go up. Why? We have conditions of scarcity have changed, okay? But 500, that was the equilibrium price. Why isn't it the equilibrium now? Because demand has not changed. At $500 per bike, the quantity demanded, let's say it's 10,000. So aluminum is now more expensive. But as far as consumers are concerned, if the price remains at 500, they still want 10,000 bikes. But from the producer's perspective, if the price remains at 500, they are not willing to produce much at all, maybe 1,000, okay? Because it costs more to produce the bike. Okay? So if the price remains at 500, consumers want to buy 10,000, producers are willing to supply only 1,000. What is that gap? That's the shortage we will get if the price remains at 500. Okay? But as soon as the producers realize, oh, there's going to be a shortage, they have an incentive to start raising the price. Okay? And so just like before, when you have a shortage, the price goes up. The rising price communicates information to everybody in the market, and you're going to end up at the new equilibrium. The quantity demanded goes down. We've moved along the demand curve. The quantity supplied is now going to move along the new supply curve. We end up back in a new balance at some quantity. It's called the equilibrium quantity, which will be somewhere between 1,000 and 10,000. All we know about it is once we get to equilibrium, the quantity demanded and the quantity supplied will be the same. Consumers, they want a bicycle. They won't have any trouble getting a bicycle, but they're going to have to pay more for it. And so some consumers will say it's not worth that much. Well, it's not worth that much to them. Okay? They're making choices with the resources they have. Bill Gates, probably, if he wants an aluminum bike, he'll probably still buy an aluminum bike. The change in price is not going to affect him. Somebody on minimum wage, probably it is going to affect them. Okay? There are 10 billion different examples that we can use to go through an analysis like this, but you always do it the same way. Draw the graph, start an equilibrium, you figure out the event that has occurred. Is this going to shift demand or supply? You draw the new curve in, you observe where the new equilibrium is, you think about what's going to happen, okay? And then you observe, well, what did the price do? What did the quantity do? Okay? It's a process that totally logical, and once you go through it enough, you won't have trouble going through it. The problem people have is when they go through it enough so that they say, oh, okay, yeah, I've got that. And then they stop. What you have to do is I think the psychologists call it overlearning. You get to the point where you understand it, and then you keep studying it so that you can do it without having to think about it. And then I've seen people who, they struggled and struggled to get a 70. And then they finally start studying correctly, and they don't go up to an 80, they go up to a 95. Okay? Once you get it, you got it. All right, we're out of time. We did not get into chapter 5, but we did go through the supply and demand model. On Moodle, I told you before about the page of additional resources. There is a summary sheet over supply and demand. I'd really encourage you to look at, to print out that summary sheet and read through it, make sure you understand those things. Also, there are practice questions that you can, I recommend you answer, and then there are videos that work those out. We will be getting started in chapter 5 on next Tuesday. Okay, so you want to read that chapter before next Tuesday. Yeah.
The first test will cover chapters 4 and 5.
No. Remember the first, we changed the date to the 29th, but the first test is 4, 5, 6, and 7, I think. Okay, so we got a lot we're going to be covering. Okay, so any questions you have about supply and demand, you want to take care of those early. All right, have a good weekend. Hmm?
All right, got classified, we're gonna make it better.
So in one of I noticed that expectations for a shifter of both the supply and demand.
Yes.
So in like a homework question, there's going to be